When I put this game on the list to be reviewed, I was questioning myself, why am I putting this on the list to be reviewed? And the only answer that I could think of is because I've seen so much fan art of that goat character that I just had to check it out to see what would spawn such a fandom.
Unlike Ori and the Blind Forest, where major gaming media outlets were gobbling it up like it was going out of style, they were more reserved when it came to Undertale, instead letting the fandom praise the game and put it on a pedestal. It was on a lot of people's top 10 list for games that came out in 2015, even taking the number 1 spot for a few that I've seen. After playing the game for a little bit, then pausing to look up some information on it, I can see why it's a game that people love. But first, the game was created almost entirely by Toby Fox, minus a few art assets as he didn't want to rely on anyone. The game was funded on Kickstarter with a goal of $5,000, but it ended up raking in $51,000. It took a little over 2.5 years and was originally going to be about 2 hours long, but he managed to triple the length of the game. Fox has said that he doesn't really take note of where he draws his inspiration from, essentially just taking in everything he's seen or read. He did state that Earthbound and the silliness of the internet were influences for the game. He pretty much made the game based on his likes, as he didn't want grinding to be necessary and wanted to make fighting feel like an option, and he opted to forego fetch quests as he doesn't like backtracking. And it said that the Super Mario RPG series of games are some of his favorites, and he wanted Undertale to have a unique battle system like those games. Undertale looks like a game that would be on the NES. It features 8-bit pixel graphics, looking similar to early JRPGs like the first Final Fantasy. The overworld is colorful, but the battle screens are black and white, and it's an interesting motif. The music is really good though. Fox's Megalovania that plays during the final boss of the Genocide run is by far my favorite track in the entire game.
As for gameplay, I'm gonna tell you right now, if you don't like those bullet hell type of games like R-Type or Gradius, you're probably not gonna like Undertale. I, for one, I'll be the first to admit, I suck at bullet hell type of games, but I love them to death, and I really enjoyed this game.
The game is like a classic JRPG from the NES. You can only move in 8 directions on the overworld, but you're not attached to a grid. Think Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. And you're able to get equipment and items to use. But it's the battle system that's completely different. You can fight, which will have a slider appear, and hitting the button at the right time will determine if the attack connects and how much damage it does. But then there's the option not to fight, allowing you to take non-violent action. You can check on your enemies, which will give you their stats and some information about them. You could use this information to show kindness to the monsters, allowing you to take mercy on them and spare them. Or with some of them, you could berate them until they leave on their own. This game has a really unique way of dealing with your foes, especially when the game keeps track of everything you've done through multiple playthroughs. Dialogue and endings will change the more you play through it. Some things becoming completely irreversible, like trying to reset the game if you made a really bad choice during a playthrough, resulting in you needing to completely erase the game from your computer and reinstall it. It's kinda like the Stanley Parable. The game changes based on your actions. Only this one can affect multiple playthroughs, which is why I can see why people like it so much. It changes each time you play through it as you choose different actions each time. The enemy attacks also change depending on your actions. If you fight them, they become more aggressive, but if you choose to talk to them and try and befriend them, they'll be easier. After your turn is over, the enemy will attack. A box will open with a heart inside of it that you control, and you'll have to move it around to avoid the attack or multiple attacks if there's more than one enemy on the screen. The white colored ones will always damage you. The blue ones will only cause damage if you're moving when they come into contact with you, green will heal you, and orange will not damage you as long as you move through them. Your heart can change colors. Red is normal, blue means that you're stuck on the ground and need to jump, green prevents you from running away, and purple means that you can only jump between certain lines. And there's also yellow, which allows you to shoot, but these only happen during certain bosses. The heart doesn't move that fast and is confined to the same movement scheme as you are in the overworld. It would be nice if it was a little faster and the movement was a little more free moving, but that's just a personal note. I chose the way of the pacifist for this playthrough. I would try talking to the monsters and sparing them. Some of these fights you may need to look up on how to manage them, like Undine. I didn't know that you had to run away from her after your soul turns back to red. The hints that the game gives you can be kind of vague and you kind of feel stupid once you look it up, as the game does give you the answer on how to beat them without killing them. It's a pretty fun combat system if you're into the bullet hell type of games, and the story is pretty entertaining. The characters were funny and well written, like Papyrus or Sans, they're very funny characters, or the game game would make you feel bad for leaving Toriel. I'm not going to talk about the story because what I experienced may be different than what yours is. I will say that the premise is that monsters and humans used to live peacefully, until humans started a war and banished the monsters underground. You play as a kid that fell down a hole and into the underground, and you're trying to get back home. It's a rather short game, so you could play it multiple times to get all the endings quite quickly. At time of writing, I got all the way up to Asgore but got stuck on him, and I was on my way to the pacifist neutral ending because I didn't befriend Undine, which was the only requirement I missed for the true pacifist ending. I also got stuck on Muffet, but she was one of the few bosses that gave me a really hard time, even though she was avoidable, but I didn't know that. And while I'm not good at the bullet hell type of games, I really enjoyed this. But I always enjoyed the genre anyway, regardless of my lack of skill. This is a game with a really good story and fun gameplay. I can see why people really like it, and it does deserve all the praise that it gets. But what worries me is that when something gets really insanely popular really quickly like this type of game, it tends to fade away just as quick or is shoved to the side once the next big thing happens. Then when it's looked back upon in a few years, we'll start seeing people not appreciating the game, chalking it up with games like Five Nights at Freddy's or Angry Birds, games that had a short burst of popularity but were just fads in the end. And they were trying to stay relevant with sequels and spin-offs and movies. I am not saying that Five Nights at Freddy's is bad, but think about it. What if the guy stopped after the first? Would anyone still care about it? Even now, after each entry in the series is covered by Let's Players like PewDiePie, no one gives a shit about it, and I'd hate to see Undertale be seen that way.
Games like Undertale don't come around that often anymore. I would dare say that this is the Chrono Trigger of this day and age. Something that's masterfully crafted, and I hope that it gets the legacy that it truly deserves.